Hello and welcome to another episode of The Coder Career with me, Cameron Blackwood. On The Coder Career, we like to discuss people's journeys about how they got into technology, how they're making money using their programming skills, and what the future looks like for them and the industry as a whole. Today's guest is Chenyse Semper. Chenyse is a consultant at InfinityWorks who are experts in cloud delivery. Chenyse herself specializes in data, making this a different episode from usual, where we'll usually more focus on web development. We discuss how Chenyse switched careers into the world of data engineering, what a typical day looks like for her, and whether you should be a consultant and how it can be a massive advantage if you're a career changer. Please do check out Startup Grad Jobs, which is my new project. You can find it at startupgradjobs.com. InfinityWorks have advertised their roles on there before, so it's always worth checking out the website for both that and other awesome roles. But until then, enjoy the show, and here is my chat with Chenyse Semper. Hey Chenyse, thanks for joining me. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thanks. Not bad. I'm enjoying the long weekend. Can't complain. It's nice to have the third
Yeah.
day off, and appreciate you joining me on what is effectively now the weekend. So for those who aren't in the UK, we get quite a lot of bank holidays through May. Actually, I think we're going to get 3 or 4, which not a bad result.
Yeah, I'm so glad.
Cool. So for people who haven't come across you before, do you want to explain a little bit about who you are and what you currently are up to?
Cool. So my name's Chenyse. I am currently working in InfinityWorks, part of Accenture, as a consultant, software consultant, which basically means we work with other clients and whatever their problem is, we try and come in and try to solve it, however that may be. Or if not solve it, at least, work with the team that's already existing there. I've been working as a data engineer. That's been like my specialty for a little bit, which just means working with other data scientists, working with other data engineers, kind of exploring how all this immense amount of data that we have available to us can actually be accessed and used to inform some really cool decisions. And so that's been fun. Before this, though, this is actually my first tech role. Before this, my background is completely non-tech. I worked in sales, I worked in HR for a bit, worked in recruitment, and I actually did my undergraduate study in economics. So very mixed bag background. But I have been enjoying this journey so far. I think this is my second year 2 in tech. I'm constantly learning, constantly developing. It's been really fun so far.
Yeah, I think once you get into that second year of tech, it's like you're suddenly a bit more comfortable with everything, and it's a lot more like you can start to enjoy it a lot more. I remember my first year, I was constantly scared of doing the wrong thing or breaking stuff, and I think what I've learned is everyone breaks stuff
Oh,
sometimes.
yes.
From the most senior developers in the world break stuff. So yeah, it's just a fact of life, and it's sometimes you got to embrace it. So yeah, it's always good to feature other career changes on here as well, because obviously, as the regular listeners will know, I've done the same thing. So, what originally gave you the idea to sort of say, okay, I've explored the more commercial side of business and the operations side. I want to get into the engineering, and I want to see how this all works. Where did that inspiration come from?
So I think in my day-to-day role, I was doing a lot of interacting with people, which is cool. You get to learn about how people think, learn what motivates them. But I think I wanted something that would challenge me in a different way. And so I started being interested in data in general, and I signed up to do a master's in data analysis. So while I was doing that, I started looking for jobs on the side that I could do that would help me, I suppose, improve whatever data skills. And I was looking at from data entry to data science. I hadn't really
Yeah.
kind of honed in on where I wanted to go, but I just thought, especially now when the words big data, the phrase big data keeps being thrown around, I thought, okay, it's a really cool place kind of to see how how to make sense of it and how it actually can impact the world. So I was doing my master's, and then I came across this course. It was like a short course, and it was being offered through Generation, which is like a charity that helps place young people in work. And they were offering a data engineering course. So it was 3 months, quite intense, 9 to 5. And the facilitators of that course was actually InfinityWorks. And because they come from, software engineering, that's their platform. That was my introduction to software engineering in general. So it was almost like an accident, but a happy accident, I suppose, because I was searching for, okay, which part of data do I want to get into? Found this, and I just thought, okay, must be fate.
That's fantastic. And I think there's a real lesson to be learned there for people listening. A lot of the time, people don't think strategically about their career change, and they don't realize how many organizations are actually out there specifically to help people try and break into tech. Like, we all know there's no secret globally, but especially in the UK, that we have so many vacancies, and it's not in a vacuum. They're doing stuff to try and help people get into it. So it's a major thing where now, there are a lot of organizations out there. I can't think of any off the top of my head. Generation was the one you just said, but
Yes,
there's definitely a few, and I'll list them in the
quite a few boot camps,
description.
yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of roots into it, and it's one of the best ways to do it because it's backed by good organizations like Infinity Works that support people getting into it, and data as well is a. I think that's the other cool part about what you did there is that a lot of the time when people advise you to learn to code, either inadvertently or not, a lot of the time it basically could be said that they're saying like learn web development, and
Mhm.
actually if anything data is bigger and it's growing more rapidly. Like it's a really exciting niche to get into. Was that a conscious decision for you to get into data in particular, and how come?
Yes, to a certain degree, because yes, I was interested in data in general. The reason being why I think maybe it has something to do with my economics degree. I think in
Mhm.
economics, you kind of talk about why people make certain choices, and data kind of, I suppose, provides data. I'm using the word in two separate ways to kind of back that sort of ideology. So I was interested in it in general, and but in software, like you said, there's so many different ways you can take your career in that. Because there was a bit that I was really interested in, like design and like front end type things, but then I just kind of enjoyed as well the back end side of things and building systems and pipelines to help get data from one place to another. I kind of saw it as something that is necessary, but maybe not as well supported as other areas. I know that within even Infinity Rex, there was a massive push to kind of bring in persons who had been working in data, who had been like data specialists. So I don't know if it is as companies are kind of recognizing they have all this masses of data, but they don't really have an efficient way to use it, that there's a push for it. But I just saw it as, okay, this is an area. It's not new, but it's still kind of new at the same time. And I could basically learn from people who have been in the field while also kind of getting real life application. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, it's exploded over the last 10 years or so. As you say, companies sitting on all this data. And it's funny, I can't remember which episode it was, but I was listening to one of the founders podcast series, and it was about I think it must have been Airbnb, about how they were pioneers of data science and
Mm-hmm.
how in 2009, companies were just, it was whatever. The term data driven decision
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really that much of a thing. And now suddenly, in the grand scheme of things, that wasn't that long ago. And now it's absolutely massive. I mean, my day job is for a large UK retailer, and the amount of data engineering that gets done to just improve what we do day to day, not even in terms of what we present to the customers to sell more. It's things like, how do we know when to get stuff back in stock in what stores and that kind of thing. It's absolutely massive. So I can imagine it's really cool. And I could definitely imagine the economic side of things helping you there. Although, as they always say, first rule of economics is consumers aren't rational. So I guess.
That is true. But who really knows? We're just kind of figuring things out as we go along, as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest things about technology careers is we can afford to go and figure these things out as we go along. And there's a skill in self teaching. And I always think it's a bit of a corny expression, but I always think everyone's self taught in technology, because it changes so quickly that we
Yeah.
have to get good at self teaching. I mean, from your side, you've been doing it for a couple of years now, and obviously as part of that, you're going through a lot of like improvement on your own skills. How do you find once someone's broken into it that what's the best way of avoiding plateauing and continuing to improve upon your technical skills?
I suppose not being one of the things I would say is not being afraid to learn new skills. So recently I switched clients, and because of that, I was
Hmm.
switching, the tech stack that I was working with, I was switching the business context and the actual problem that was being solved. And at first I was a bit wary because I'm moving away from something I knew had been using for, a year and a bit to something that was basically new. And there was a bit of reservation on my part. I'm like, oh, I'm starting all over. But just kind of seeing it as an opportunity to expand your skill set and realizing that it's not really starting over because you're just building on the skills that you already have. Because as much as languages might be different and frameworks might be different, the concepts that exist within software are pretty similar. Once you kind of have the basic concepts down and you kind of understand that and you've kind of formed your own mental picture of how the concepts work and interact with each other, it's easier to pick up new skills. So in terms of not plateauing, not being afraid to step outside of whatever your comfort zone is one good way, I'd say.
Yeah, 100%. Because something that I always come back to is the fundamentals never change, as you just said. And a lot of the time, people that aren't in the industry assume, because they hear the term programming language,
Uh-huh.
and it's a natural assumption for them to think, oh, it's just like a human language. And, if I learn English, then it's going to be just as much effort for me to learn Arabic if I already know Chinese, for instance. And it's never going to get easier over time. But actually, it's just a completely different setup, and people shouldn't be afraid of going and tackling subsequent stuff, because it's not always going to be as hard as when you're first self-teaching. Like I remember there was when I was first learning JavaScript and I was trying to figure out how loops worked
Mhm.
and doing a zero index and stuff like that. And I just couldn't get my head around it. And I just thought, I'm too stupid for this. That was, I remember just sitting there with like my head in my hands at my desk at like 11 p.m. at night, trying to do this stupid exercise on Codecademy. And I remember it was such a goofy exercise as well. It was, make whale sounds, like do an English to whale translator, and it was just replace all of the letters with
Yeah.
e's and o's, so it sounds like a whale. And it was the most ridiculous exercise, and I remember just sitting there thinking, I'm so frustrated at this. I'm like a grown up who can't figure out how to translate this into whale talk. And I just felt so stupid. But
It's
it's one of those ones where you just end up, over time, these things come naturally.
And we're always harder on ourselves and our expectations to kind of learn new things in terms of, I suppose, the speed in which you kind of expect yourself to grasp something new than other people are on us. It's like joining a team, like you kind of forget that other people have gone through this experience. So they know and they don't expect you to be however you expect yourself to be. There's a massive difference between how we see ourselves negatively and how other people see us. Probably imposter syndrome, but whatever the correct phrase is, it's something that most people who are in tech kind of suffer with. And because most people suffer with it, they kind of understand. It's just like a little loop.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think that's huge. And I think it's funny, isn't it? Because I do feel like imposter syndrome is one of the biggest things that particularly career changers like us, we
Mhm,
do end up naturally talking about it quite a lot. And I couldn't help but always compare myself with the comp sci grads.
mhm,
But it's funny because so many people have it, and yet it doesn't stop it.
mhm.
I mean, for anyone who maybe isn't familiar, from your side, what do you think imposter syndrome is, and how can people go about helping themselves with it?
I think it's this irrational fear that you are the absolute worst at whatever you're doing. And everyone knows that you're the worst at what you're doing. And everyone's judging you in their minds. That's how I would phrase it. But yeah, it's just this thought that you are not doing what you need to do, and everyone can just looks at you and they know that you are an imposter in this situation. Like that's just generally how you feel. How to overcome it? Do you ever? I don't know. Maybe how to cope with it. Kind of like stopping yourself in like your stopping your thought process in the tracks when it first comes up, and you kind of recognize it for what it is, and you're like, oh, that's not real. That's me, basically lying to myself. And so, yeah, I don't know if you ever just kind of get out of it because, as you said, even people who've been in the field for ages and ages still kind of go through it, but recognizing it and not letting it derail your life, I suppose.
Yeah, I can relate to that, because it's like I remember my first ever full time web dev job.
Mm,
I Every day when I would finish, I would, before my probation, I would just like be having dinner with my girlfriend. And she'd be like, "How was your day?" And I'd be like, "I feel like a fraud. I'm a fraud. They've hired me accidentally. I've talked my way into this,
yeah,
and I'm gonna get let go on probation. I'm panicking." And then it was fine in the end, and it often is. And even if it's not, a lot of the time you end up picking skills to work on to work on and build on in the future anyway. So it's so common and everyone gets it. And I think what's important to remember is that I think it was similar to what you said earlier, how we often remember what other people have done very right, and we're very unlikely to even notice someone else's mistakes or that kind of thing. So it's very common for humans, because I think most people, particularly if they've ended up in this industry, are on the perfectionist spectrum in terms of, they're quite driven, because you have to be to self teach and career change. And I think we end up comparing ourselves to everyone else, but not, as you said, acknowledging the fact that maybe other people have weak spots that we don't. And as career changes, we can lean on our previous careers in ways that other people can't. I mean, is there anything you've done in your previous work before being in engineering that you've found useful that maybe other people wouldn't have been able to take advantage of?
I think what is commonly referred to as like soft skills, being able
Yeah.
to communicate an idea is something
Mm,
that I didn't even recognize was a skill that I had until, you have had to put it in practice and you kind of recognize, oh, this is not necessarily a natural thing that everyone does. You don't even realize sometimes how you've honed skills in other careers and other experiences that you've had.
definitely.
So because, for example, I was working in sales, and a big part of sales is just making friends with people. And it's something that comes, I suppose, almost easily to me now. So it's helpful for like client engagements, because before you actually talk about what you need to do, being able to make the other person comfortable is important. But you don't realize that, oh yeah, this is an actual skill that you can actually put into practice. So things like that, so as communicating, especially communicating complex ideas in simple ways, is a really important skill. I still am working on it, but I realized that my starting position, because of the experiences I've had, might not be someone else's starting position from that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot of the time we don't realize that we have those additional skills. I've definitely found the same thing, because I also didn't realize, and this is a critical point, I didn't realize how commercial any kind of engineering job actually is, and how much, as you say, of a value add it is to have some client facing skills. I mean, especially doing what you do, I can imagine, because I'm in supply chains. All I do is deal with internal stakeholders in my day to day work. But obviously, as a consultant, you're dealing with the client themselves. I mean, what's a day in the life like for a consultant actually? Like, what do you do for someone that's never been in that side of things before?
I guess, to be fair, before I'm going to preface my answer by saying it really depends on the client and what the project you're working on is. But for me personally, you wake up, you probably sign in, you do a couple of admin things, you have your first stand-up meeting. Depending on the size of the team, you might just talk through what you worked on yesterday. If you have any blockers, point out if you want to pair with anyone. Probably do some work individually on your own, might pair with someone else. During the week, sometimes we have meetings to kind of elaborate on different tickets to just understand what the person who wrote the ticket kind of meant from a business point of view, as opposed to like a technical point of view, and kind of try to merge those two worlds together. What else do we do? I don't know. A day really kind of depends on what's going on. The day, I would say my days are pretty flexible, so I can kind of decide to a certain degree how my day is going to run. I think the only constant is we do have meetings at least with the team at least once a day, but that's my only constant. Everything else depends.
Yeah, that makes sense. And would you say it's usually quite a good role for career changes, because you do end up with that best of both worlds, where you're dealing with the client and you're dealing with the technology?
I definitely have enjoyed it. I think at the time of me wanting to do a career change, I was looking for something that would challenge me. Definitely found that. I am definitely challenged. But I also was looking for something that had the same sort of level of comfort with the people I was working with rather, and I have that as well. So it is, yeah, best of both worlds type of role.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always wondered about it actually. So I've never really done any kind of consultancy role, and I've always thought it must be an interesting one, because sometimes you get client requirements changing, and you have to think on your feet a little bit, and the client wants something done a certain way, even if you maybe disagree. I guess you've maybe had some situations like that where it's hard to balance with what the client wants, even if you think there may be a better solution.
Yeah, and you never know what you might end up with a client that's really difficult. You might end up with a client that's really accommodating. you never really know, but you do have to kind of draw on whatever skills you have of negotiating or whatever else to, forge a path through that. But, well, it's important. But that's probably important in any role. I do think, though, that there are people who don't like the consultancy because they just want to code or they're just interested in the tech and that is their only interest, which is fair enough. But for me, I do prefer the consultancy side of things. Like the tech is really interested and it's really cool to build things. But if it wasn't balanced with that client engagement, I don't know how. Yeah, I don't think that type of role would be for me. I do like the
Yeah.
clients.
It's always a good question for people to ask in interviews, I think. And I think maybe people either don't think to answer it or they're worried it comes across as a red flag, where they say, like, how much time am I spent coding versus how much time am I doing stakeholder management? And, the stereotypical developer never wants to do any stakeholder management. They just want to code. But actually,
Yeah.
there's not that many people like that. It's a spectrum where, I'm probably 50-50. Like, I really don't mind doing the stakeholder management, but also I love getting stuck into some code. And it's worth people asking, because interviews, I always say to people, interviews are a two-way process.
Yeah.
And it's very much about, you've got to find out if that employer is for you, especially in a market like technology, where, as we discussed, the market is, luckily for us, in our favor as engineers. So we can afford to be a little bit more picky.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree. Yeah.
Yeah, and we touched on the technology a bit there. For you at the moment, what do you find your day-to-day stack is when you're doing data engineering?
Ooh. To be fair, recently I've been doing less. I've been interacting with the data a bit less, and now I've
Hmm.
sort of shifted a bit to more platform building things.
Oh, cool.
So I've been using Terraform quite a bit now, and it's a new client, so I'm still kind of getting to grips with their tech stack that they end up using. They also do some front development things, so they use AppStream quite a bit. They are using a lot of API gateways. They're using a lot of AWS kind of cool things as well. I actually had to code something in HTML, and I hadn't done that for a long time, long time. But so it's a mix. But yeah, I think I haven't, as opposed to my last role where I was involved, I suppose, in like Spark technologies. I don't see that as much now, so it's a bit different. More infrastructure platform, still cool, but different.
Yeah, I guess that's something that people should remember as well, is that the tech stack that you're working on can and will chop and change. Like, for me, I mainly do front end, but I've flipped between React and Angular more
Mm.
times than I can count. It just depends on the requirements, either of a client or a stakeholder, depending on the kind of setup you're in. I mean, if people want to learn the technologies that you're working on at the moment, is there any particular resources that you think are good that they can check out?
I think looking at projects that have already been written using whatever you want to check out and just checking their GitHub pages is something that recently has been
Mm,
useful to me. Kind of seeing an already finished thing or something that's in the process and then going back to the source code and recognizing, okay, that's how they did that and that's how they linked that in. That's been really useful to me, kind of learning new tech. Outside of that, almost any technology you can think of, if you type it in, they probably have some like help page or like this is for beginners page, which I also find very useful. So I think there's a mix of both things.
Yeah, in my first job, one of the senior engineers said to me, "No one uses the manual," and
Oh,
they were referring to the documentation, and it's a good point. Like, a lot of the time, the answers you're looking for are just contained in that documentation. And I'm the first to admit I can be very impatient and fly through the documentation and miss the answer, which I very embarrassingly did on an open source project recently, where I went on their Discord and publicly said to the founder, "This should really be in the docs." And he linked it to me and he was like, "What, you mean this?" And I was like, yeah. So for anyone who uses a certain email tool, if you look back at a message towards the end of April from me, you can see me make a fool of myself on a Discord conversation. Uh, but yeah, it's a huge one. And I definitely, it's funny you say that you just have recently started doing that with looking at the full size project, because that is something I've started doing this year as well. And it is such a hack
mhm.
to understand how stuff's built. Like, I can't believe I never thought to do it before,
Yeah.
but actually just going cloning it to your machine. I don't know why. I feel silly almost saying this, but it felt a bit illegal sometimes, just cloning something to my machine, and having a poke through. But it's open source for a reason, so they don't have a problem with people doing that, and it's a really good way of understanding how and why things work the way they do, and definitely people shouldn't be afraid to do that. And the other thing I'd say as well, particularly for front end work, jumping into dependencies and libraries and understanding what they're doing. I always kind of thought of them as magic a little bit before I started really getting into them, and it suddenly became a lot less intimidating. Like we were talking about imposter syndrome earlier, and I did just think that certain developers were just magic, like these like celebrity open source people, and they're just humans. Like
Yeah.
they're probably very smart, but they're just humans. So their code is the same code as ours. We can just have a look and see what we can learn from it. So I totally agree. That's it's really good. And for people who are kind of in the position you were in a couple of years ago, where they're keen to do something on the spectrum of data, or even just technology in general. Do you have any advice you would give to them at the moment?
Just do it. Take the jump. Take the leap. I keep saying there's so many really good programs out there that support people who are looking to career change, and especially people who are trying to get into tech. I know you said you're going to link them later, so check those out. And they provide support not just in like learning something new, but sometimes also placing you in a place that will be able to support you as you go about your journey of changing careers and learning and developing in this new sort of scenario. So I would say just take the plunge, just do it. At the very least, if you don't like it, you can always change your career again. Like you, that's the thing. I never thought this. I remember when I was growing up, I always knew I was going to go to university. Like my parents are very into education, but I generally thought that that was like just the path, that this is what people did, and there was so much pressure to kind of decide what I wanted to do. Like, people ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said so many things when I was growing up. I wanted to be a pediatrician, I wanted to be a dentist, I wanted to be an accountant. You actually have the control to do almost anything you want to do, and if you don't like what you do, just change it again. That's my advice. Just try it. Who knows?
Yeah, it's weird. People there, there's almost a stigma against just getting into something, and just trying it, and like, why not? Like, it's never going to be a bad thing having programming languages on your CV, even if you just give it a crack, and then you decide after 18 months it's not for you. Then you're just a more valuable employee doing something else. Like, there are all kinds of jobs where having a bit of coding knowledge, but it's only something you do on the side, is so useful. Like all kinds of analyst jobs, particularly for startups, like. There's a multitude of jobs around like business analysts and that kind of thing, where maybe you're only coding 20% of the time, but actually, yeah, I totally agree. There's all kinds of stuff. And, even if you just go back to doing what you did before, it's still useful. Like, say, if I decided to go back, I would have been a technical recruiter who now knows how to code. So it would have added extra value to me.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with just trying it and seeing. And if you love it, you love it. If you don't, like you said, you're still getting valuable experience. There's no the pressure that we sometimes put on ourselves to have things figured out. It's not okay. It's not just internal, but a lot of it is internal. And if we can kind of break ourselves out of that, we would do so many things that we never thought that we were capable of.
Yeah, and to use an economics and business term, we really suffer from the sunk cost fallacy in our careers as people, and people think, oh, I can't get into this because I've been doing this career for X amount of time. Some of the best software engineers I've ever worked with didn't start coding until they're like 40s. And it doesn't make a difference. Like you can get into this at any time. It doesn't matter how much time you put into a previous career. Like I was 23 when I switched, and that is so young. And even then, at the time, I was like, "Oh no, I've been in technical recruitment for 3 years. I can't do anything else now." Like,
I get it, but yeah, life is short. I think that you should be enjoying your life. If you're not currently enjoying what you're doing and you want something new, go after it.
yeah, we're afraid of the unknown, and a lot of the times you take a leap into the unknown and try something out. Chances are, you'll rise to the challenge. And it's a silly example, but I'd never had a cat before until last year, and I didn't really think I was a big cat guy. And eventually, we just got one, and I wasn't sure how I'd do with him. And suddenly I rise to it, and like I'm able to look after him. And he turned a year old a few weeks ago, and he's not dead. So uh, I rose to the occasion of being a cat owner, and you can relate that cat owner experience whatever you're learning in technology. You can definitely do it. And to ground things back more into what the conversation originally started as, rather than me chatting about my cat. Uh, Obviously, you went through the Infinity Works Academy, which is a really cool process. How was that? What's that like day to day?
It was really supportive. It was intense but supportive at the same time, if those two things could merge.
Mm-hmm.
I was learning, even though I had done a 3-month data academy where that was my first introduction to Python and other technologies, the 3-month Infinity Works Academy kind of went deeper than the things I had learned. And then we got to also work on a project with a team, and it was like an insight into what you might be doing on a client. So we had stakeholders, we had to consult them, figure out what they wanted. So it was really cool to have that sort of real life experience that still wasn't real life. And then you're also able to form good relationships with people who are at almost exactly the same career level as you, because you both come into the academy together. And then that support system kind of continues with you throughout your career. Like we've been at Infinity Rex, or I've been at Infinity Rex for 2 years plus now, and I still talk to the people who was, even though we're on different accounts, etc. I still go to them, still talk to them. So that is something that I think is really useful. In terms of day to day, I'm trying to remember. It seems like so long ago now. I know back then. I think we did JavaScript. I think it's changed. Probably doing TypeScript now, new fancy language. But it is going to be a coding language. You're going to learn some back end. Going to do some front end. Going to put it all together to create a project at the end of it that you submit to your stakeholders.
Yeah, and I guess the real advantage to it is the fact that it's commercially oriented. Like one of the biggest gripes I have with a lot of the learn to code stuff online is that a lot of the stuff that people are told to work on via these courses is completely commercially useless. Like there's no situation where you would be asked to build a lot of the stuff that the online courses ask you to build in a real life job. And ultimately, that's what the vast majority of people are taking online coding classes to do. They're either trying to launch business, so they're building commercial stuff, or they're trying to get a job in a company, which is more likely. And then obviously they're being paid to build commercial stuff. And the advantage of going through a course that is it's provided by an organization directly is that you're learning the skills that they place value on, which means that it's the kind of skills that they're willing to pay employees for. So you already know that you're learning stuff that is going to be frank, get you paid.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's definitely worth people exploring. Be it Infinity Works or anywhere around schemes that are backed by companies for that very reason. I'm really huge on that. But if people do want to get in touch with Infinity Works, I do believe they have a September intake, don't they? Am I right in remembering that?
I think they do, yes. I believe recruitment and applications are open for that now, so people can go ahead and apply and hope for the best.
Yeah. And if you've got any tips, do you have any tips for how to get through the application process, or anything people should keep in mind?
I would say be authentic. I mean, outside of, yes, they're looking for, I suppose, some interest in tech and, basic tech skills, etc. At the end of the day, you want to work in a place that you enjoy the people that you're working. You enjoy the company of the people that you're working with. You enjoy the mentality of the people that you're working with, and you can only know if you're going to enjoy it if you feel free enough to be your true authentic self in your interview. And I have found that, because I've done a few interviews as well, the back and forth goes a lot better when when the person who you're talking with is comfortable and free to kind of express themselves. And it's okay if you don't have, loads and loads of experience, but if you are particularly passionate about something in tech, being able to express that, the reason you're passionate as well, would be a help in your interview process.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's around the attitude rather than necessarily the technical skills that you currently possess, because it's about your potential. Because it's an academy, that's what they're hiring for. So That makes sense. And I agree with what you said about being authentic throughout the process, because as we said earlier, it's a two-way street in interview. And, it's just as much as no matter what level the job is, it's about you seeing if a company is for you as well as if it's for them, because it's a two-way deal that works well. And both sides are going to get lots of value out of it if it's a good fit.
Yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah, and then in practical terms as well, the job itself. Do you actually have to do you have to travel a lot with it being consultancy, or is it mainly remote first?
For me, I've been working from home for a long, long time. I I did go into the office. I went to Leeds earlier in April, maybe 2 weeks ago. And before that, I hadn't traveled for months. I do think there is an element of kind of deciding what works for you. So because my client is based in Leeds, they
Mhm.
don't really expect me to travel from Birmingham to Leeds on a regular basis. There is an office in Birmingham, and people do go into the office on a more regular basis, but I've been mostly remote because it works for me and my lifestyle. But for people who do want, a bit more interaction, there is that option as well. There's a bit of flexibility around it.
Yeah, I'm a big remote work fan as well. I mean, my office is 450 miles away, so it's not exactly practical for me to go more than
Oh
once or
my god,
twice a month.
just like
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's usually a 4 a.m. alarm and first flight down to London. But yeah, it's one of those ones where I personally find that I'm much more productive at home because I can just crack on. And then when I do go and see the team, it's a purely social occasion. Um, I'm it's not that I mind office chatter. It's just that I'm incredibly easily distracted. And I'm the kind of guy where if I'm tapped on the shoulder, then I will have no self control and chat to someone for over an hour. And like, so I find remote work is quite a productivity hack for me like that.
fair enough. Yeah, I agree. I am easily disrupted as well. So that's probably why I enjoy. I do think that when I work at home, I do get more work than when I go to the office. If that's a good thing, I don't know. If it's a bad thing, but it's what it is.
Yeah, well, and it's important for people to remember as well with consultancy jobs. A lot of time, people assume because you're dealing with a client, they assume you're going to have to be rocking up at the client's office every day. And obviously, these days it's 2023. We don't need to do that anymore. So
I think
you
the
can push your
pandemic
code
really
remotely.
changed.
Yeah,
Pandemic definitely changed things.
yeah, absolutely. Cool. So if people want to hear a little bit more from you and keep up with what you're up to, what's the best way for people to reach you?
I am not very active on social media. I have multiple times considered like starting a page, kind of talking about my journey in tech, but I've not really done
Oh,
that.
you
So
should do it. You should do it for sure.
right now, the best way would probably just be my LinkedIn page, where I'm pretty sure it's just my name, Chenyse Semper, and that would be the best way.
Brilliant, cool. So thanks so much for coming on today. It was really good to speak. And the listeners won't know this, but I appreciate you coming back again after my microphone corrupted itself. So this has been your second time on the Code of Career, but the first one will be lost to the sands of time because my audio file corrupted. So thank you extra for coming on twice.
No problem at all. My fingers are crossed for this one. We'll see what happens.
Oh, believe me, my fingers and toes are crossed for this. That microphone, honestly. But yeah, thanks again, Chenyse. And if listeners want to hear more from the Code of Career, we are in your RSS feed every other Monday. Thanks for listening.